with the Badger Talk, and we've got a very special guest today. Last week it was Mike Heller. This week it's Badger247's Mike Hogan. Mike, how you doing, man?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having me on.
I'm good, and I'm excited to talk. I mean, we've got a lot to talk about. We see the title, Spring Ball. I haven't talked too much about Spring Ball on the podcast yet. Those of you who've seen the articles, that's there. But I'm excited to talk Spring Ball. But first, we've got to focus on Wisconsin basketball, which, I mean, we've been at the games. We've known the tumultuous season and how it's kind of been a crazy year thus far.
Yeah, it's been kind of a up and down, kind of roller coaster for them. They start off, of course, nobody really thought much of them before the season with the low, the preseason poll low low
Right.
ranking, and then they kind of and they played a lot of close games at the beginning, but obviously climbed to 14. But I always kind of thought that their style of play would, living on the edge with the close games and not being able to kind of put teams away would kind of be something that would come back to get them, and it has a couple
Right.
times here. Uh, and they dealt with some injuries and a couple tough matchups, and now they're kind of squarely on the. They've been kind of teetering on and off the NCAA tournament bubble here for the last couple weeks. So definitely a huge game, or big win for them, big step in the right direction on Tuesday to beat Michigan. Now the challenge is now to get a couple wins in a row, at least two in a row, to kind of
Yeah.
get out of the kind of rut they're in of winning one and then going back to losing, and it's been kind of that trend they haven't been able to kind of get rid of the last couple of weeks.
No, you're right. I mean, they haven't won two straight since January 3rd, I believe. It's been a while. It's been over a month, and the Badgers have played a lot of basketball. And I mean, you're right. The first part of the schedule, it seemed like as if they exceeded expectations given the preseason polls, how the team had gone, and the loss of transfers as well as Johnny Davis. But then you see them pull out a bunch of close games, and that's been the norm for Wisconsin. But you have to understand that more than not, you're going to regress to the mean when it comes to these very close within 5 point games. And essentially, Wisconsin has. I mean, I forget the exact ranking record, but they're still pretty darn good when it comes to these really close games. It's just they're closer to 500 than what they had showcased in the beginning of the year when they started 11-2. So that's kind of been the difference. Still, they're in a tough conference, and believe it or not, I mean, the preseason poll has them. I don't know exactly if they're ninth right now, but they're hovering around ninth. So maybe it was right.
Yeah, I mean, early on it wasn't. I mean, you could see you can. It's easy now to say it's right, but I guess early on it did seem like they were outperforming the expectations that people had laid out for them, and the
Right.
expectations I guess were fair because they did lose Johnny and Brad, who were Johnny was had a dominant season last year. Brad, produced for him, but also the leadership I think was what they probably miss most, at this point. But yeah, they're obviously hovering around ninth place, and as we've said here so far, they need to kind of uh, get out of the up and down trend they are in right now, and stack some wins.
Raul kindly reminds us that they are 10-5 in those close games. Let's talk about Michigan though, because we did beat Michigan, and it was a game in a way that was somewhat of a must win for both teams. In that Michigan and Wisconsin came into the game very similarly in the rankings, similarly in terms of record. Michigan a little better in the Big Ten tournament, but when you talk about the Badgers win over Michigan, it was a nice win for them. They obviously ended up winning 64 to 59, but it was another interesting win in that they couldn't close out the game. They didn't score or didn't hit a field goal over the last 10:42, which is unprecedented in today's level of basketball. But on top of that, they were able to hold Michigan and sustain the lead that they had and be able to kind of pull it off at the end of the day. It was a strong win. And before Mike comes back on, I do want to give a shout out when we start about talking about this game. Gotta give a shout out to the unsung heroes. That's what I call them. Guys like Carter Gilmore, guys like Kamari McGee, because the Badgers don't win without their contributions. When you saw the difference between the first and second half, we'll first start with defensively. the Badgers obviously had a very strong start to the game, and then they had an even stronger beginning of the second half where they went up 12 in general. And a big part of the win, especially in the second half, was shutting down Hunter Dickinson, who didn't have a single field goal in the second half for a good portion of time. And Carter Gilmore, he's a guy who came off the bench while there was some fouls, but also came off the bench in general, and he helped really make Hunter Dickinson somewhat of an afterthought in the offense, and that was a key part kind of the game. But for you, Mike, what were your kind of takeaways after the win over Michigan?
Well, obviously, as you mentioned, they were able to kind of find a way to limit Dickinson in the second half. Obviously, he didn't make a field goal, so that was noteworthy. After he obviously made some shots in the first half, and it was kind of going back and forth with the student section a little bit. So that was obviously an interesting element of the and give Dickinson credit. If you're going to be the villain, you might as well do it.
Right.
He doesn't really walk the line. If he's going to be the guy talking trash, he's going to do it. He obviously that was a big part of the game on Tuesday, at least in the first half. And I thought the crowd was pretty good too. I know people, make a lot of the Kohl Center and everything, but I thought the crowd was pretty good. But just in terms of the game, obviously, just when they let up the lead, when they're up 12, and they kind of started to look like they're going to let another one slip away after getting up, by double digits, you can just feel like a tension. I guess it's not the first time this year we've kind of felt that, but it was interesting that you look at that, the last 10 minutes they didn't make a field goal. I mean, how many teams have been able to survive that kind of game? I mean, you probably look up the analytics, and like I said, I wrote in my story after the game, if ESPN Stats and Information had a scenario for that, like a numbers or probability, the likelihood of them winning is probably slim to none.
Yeah.
Make a shot, but obviously the free throw shooting by Asijan was, they got the ball to their, the best free throw shooter, most reliable guy.
Only free throw shooter, maybe, but no, we kidding.
Yeah. But he was able to knock them down, and they were able to get some stops. And Michigan kind of went cold too. They've missed two of their last 11. They only made 2 of their last 11 shots or something like that. So it was a combination of them, being able to hit some free throws. Obviously, having Asijan at the line helps. They didn't have to risk, Crowell and Wall shooting the free throws. Klesman hit a couple big ones as well, and then they were able to play some defense. And it's almost like this team, after some losses this year, has blamed their defense instead of the offense, and
that was fun.
That's led to some frustration with fans saying, "Why are they only talking about their defense?" It's because they know they need to be absolutely perfect on that end, or near perfect to win, to be able to overcome the inevitable offensive droughts that they hit every game. I mean, there's no way around it. This team, you can go back and look through the games, and they probably had a scoring drought in almost every single one. So they were able to somehow, some way pull that out. And, it was a big win for them, because if they lose 2 in a row, it's just the season's, it's risky to lose. You blow 2 back-to-back, get up big, and you blow back-to-back games like that. That's tough to overcome. And now they, like I said, like we've said a couple times already, they need to, stack some wins now. It's time to take another step in the right direction, instead of going 1 step forward and another step, kind of backwards.
No, and I think the point that you bring up, I mean, I talked about it in an article myself, because you're right. After some losses, especially some losses where it was very clear the offense was inept, you hear them blaming the defense. And why is that? Because defense is the area where they believe that they can be perfect. They can win a game by being perfect defensively. They understand their fallacies offensively. They understand the talent might not necessarily be there. I mean, when you talk about the scores, Tyler Wall's scoring has significantly decreased. He showcased some of the aggressiveness during a small stretch in the second half of this past game, but he hasn't been necessarily the scorer that we've seen earlier in the season. Stephen Crowell, when Wall was injured, had a strong stretch of games scoring a significant amount of points. That hasn't been to the level that it has been over the past few games. Really, when you're relying on scoring, it's the top guards, Chucky Hepburn and Connor Essegian. Essegian has been definitely a pleasant surprise in terms of the amount that he's been able to score recently. Hepburn, though, the consistency is the issue, and even when he has strong games, we've seen the sometimes poor decision making at the end of the games that really overtakes his entire game. And when you talk about it, defensively, they're a strong unit. Even with Connor Essegian on the court, they're a strong unit. Max Klesmet is the best on-ball defender on the team, but you have two strong ones in him and Chucky Hepburn. And then inside the paint, the Badgers have been able to do well. They take away the three, force teams to shoot inside the paint, and are able to do well enough in that regard to where they believe they can be really strong on that level.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned Hepburn's shots at the end of the games. I thought Guard had a good answer for that earlier this week when we asked him about it. He said that it's not all on Chucky. There are other things execution wise that go on around him that maybe people don't understand, and it's also a matter of Guard. I know people maybe raise eyebrows at this comment that he made, but finding ways, or still discovering what his sweet spots are, what spots he likes to get to late in the games. That's something that Guard is still working through with him, and I think that's fair. I think that's fine. You're always trying to find ways to improve and get better and to be more effective. And obviously, some of the shots that Chucky's taken at the end of games have been questionable and maybe not the right shot, especially against Nebraska the other day or last weekend now. But I still think that they have a lot of confidence in him.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to make those plays, and obviously you talked a little bit about Essegian, his playmaking, not only just 3-point shooting, but I thought Tuesday I was most impressed with his ability to get to the basket, and he's shown that. That wasn't the first time that it's been a couple weeks now of seeing that, but I thought Tuesday was most consistent. It happened a couple different times throughout the game where he was able to get open or take it himself. And I thought that was a really good, strong, positive development for them to see his game kind of evolving beyond just being able to knock down threes. So I think that's something to keep an eye on down the stretch.
No, definitely. And I mean, a good part of that is when I think, kind of transitioning, but also focusing on Hepburn, when you see the ability that Kamari McGee showcased this past Tuesday, the aggressiveness and something that hadn't been there, where he was actually able to execute and facilitate the offense. And to do so, you don't need to do something special as the backup point guard here. You just need to be able to execute the offense, and when the opportunity is there, take it. And we hadn't necessarily seen McGee do that a lot offensively this season. And then to see the aggressiveness a couple of times, find a shot, and take the opportunity when it was there, that in a way eases the burden on Hepburn. And Guard talked about it too, because when you have the backup point guard able to do things, you can pull your starter when you need to, when he needs the requisite rest, when you want to talk things over, and that's not necessarily been there all year, and that increases the pressure because while this team has more guards necessarily than big men, it still doesn't have too many guards that they want to play. And so it does increase the pressure on those starters, especially Hepburn with the ball in his hand so much. And so that was another thing which I noticed on Tuesday, which you hope does kind of improve not only Hepburn's play, but also the Badgers with their rotation going forward as they condense to 8 or 7 guys.
Yeah, Guard mentioned, and I think everybody knew this too, it was a good matchup for Kamari. He was going up against some smaller guards who,
Right.
wouldn't take him down low. So that, didn't have that concern. It was kind of an even matchup where he was able to, stay, it wasn't too much. I mean, and then he wasn't challenged with a bigger physical guy defensively, and it was a little bit easier for him to move offensively as well. I thought overall, as you said, it was an encouraging performance just for the matchup aside, that point aside, everybody understands that, but just for him to get out there and to have that kind of performance and to really, really contribute to a victory like that, it's a huge, huge confidence boost for him. And I talked to him yesterday. You could tell that the performance really,
he said it himself. Yeah,
really kind of helped him. It really showed him that the work he's been doing behind the scenes had starting to pay off. I mean, he mentioned that it wasn't just that game that he was really happy with it was how he's been practicing. And we don't get to see practice. The coaches and the players get to obviously they're around him every day, and that they say the same thing about him, is that he was really building toward a game like that. And now he's got to find a way to contribute even more. Be consistent with it. Maybe not contribute even more, but just stay steady with it and give them some good minutes. And maybe he won't be playing 13 minutes every night like he did against Michigan, but if he's able to give them 5-6 good minutes a game, maybe even closer to 10, that's pretty good for them to have him be able to contribute. And like I said, the confidence. He said his confidence is always high, but now he's playing with different swagger to him for having a game like that. And obviously fans, were a little critical of the 3-point shot he took, but I mean, he was into one. He was feeling like, he was, things were flowing for him, and he was a little bit of a heat check, I guess. It's the way he kind of put it the other day. If there's one thing you can nitpick out of that performance with it, the other night, that's it. I mean, that he missed, but he got open, he got some screens. That first jump shot, Wall, set a screen, he was able to get around it, and he made the contested jumper, and then he had another jumper in the middle of the lane, and then the layup where he got another kind of screen from Gilmore and was able to burn the defenders to the basket. So I thought it was a really, and he showed some hustle too. He got that offensive rebound. It didn't lead to any points. They left a lot of meat on the bone in terms of second chances. They only scored like 7 or 8 second chance. I think if you get 15 offensive rebounds, you got to have a little bit more. I mean, 8's, it's fine, but for a team that struggles enough offensively and struggles to hit free throws, I mean, when you get second chances, you got to be able to take advantage of a couple more of those, and they did. But overall, a really strong performance for Kamari, and obviously Greg Gard and team's got to be really happy with what they saw.
No, definitely. And kind of transitioning, because we do have a really early game, an 11 a.m. game, which I may or may not have complained about, against Rutgers tomorrow morning. And like you said earlier, it's a game where it's really important, not only for the Badgers and their playoff hopes, but also to string two together. What do they need to do to get this victory tomorrow?
Well, I kind of want to see Tyler Wall get going again. He had that strong performance against Penn State, and you thought that was okay. He's heading in the right direction again. Might be feeling a little bit better after a couple weeks of dealing with that injury, that ankle injury. He's obviously still playing through some pain. No matter, he doesn't want to admit to that, but he obviously was or still is. I think you want to see a little bit more out of him. And Hepburn too. Had a rough game. Last couple games hasn't been very efficient shooting the basketball. He's contributed in other ways defensively, but I want to see those two guys get going tomorrow. I think that's important. Like I said with Wall, just can he start to stack some good performances together? After he's had a couple of good games, and then he has a performance like the other night where he wasn't very effective on either. He was effective defensively as always, but offensively, you want to see him start making some of those shots. And obviously, the free throw line is just going to be somewhere he struggles all year. I don't think that can be fixed at this point, unfortunately, for Badger fans' sake of being having to watch a team struggle so much at the free throw line.
Right.
But you want to see him, kind of get going. I thought Stephen Crowell the other night played well. I know, he missed like 7 or 8 straight shots after scoring 6 points to start the game, but the assists, the rebounding, you want to see that continue. I thought it was impressive that, even though the shots maybe weren't falling as much as he wanted, he was still able to kind of keep himself in the game, not get frustrated. And he was able to contribute in other ways. So I think, can they get everybody to kind of play on a consistent level? Because that's really what has kind of led to this losing rut they've been stuck in. Can that happen tomorrow? They need to be able to, they took a step in the right direction. Now they just got to be able to. It's a tough matchup too. And Rutgers, they're not like, both teams kind of strike me as similar. Like Rutgers, they kind of like to muddy it up. They're a tough team defensively.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of similar mindset of Rutgers might be more skilled offensively, of course, but it's going to be. I'm not expecting a very high scoring game. In fact, I think last year's game between these teams here, I think both of them were relatively low scoring, if I can remember correctly. But a lot has happened since then here, so tough to remember.
Right. And I mean, I think you bring up really good points about Wall and things like that. When we talked to Wall this past week, I asked because it seemed like the time when the offense was clicking was against Penn State. I think that's been the best offensive performance we've seen as an entire team. That was the one performance where the defense wasn't really strong, especially in the second half, that allowed Penn State to get back in it. But the offense helped them get the win. They shot over 50% and over 45% from three. And the top four, when you talk about Hepburn, Essegian, Wall, and Crowell, all four had really good games that day. As for what to how they can all put it together, Wall kind of put the blame on himself. He said he hadn't been aggressive enough. He wanted to be more aggressive. And we saw a glimpse of it in the second half, but that's like you said, I want to see him get going. And the way he does is get more aggressive. Now, something I thought that was a bit of a pattern against Michigan that he felt a little more comfortable was getting the ball at the top of the key, getting the ball there instead of posting up because it allowed him to kind of get a head start and be more aggressive, channeling that aggression, and do more with the basketball. I thought that that's where he got a couple of baskets. I wonder if guard sets up a couple of packages that allow him to operate in that way. But also, even if it's down low, figuring out different ways to stay aggressive, and that can really promote the offense because if he's going, you can get the guards going on kickouts. Same with Crowell because Crowell helped a couple of those kickouts in this past game. When you get the bigs going, the guards as a result will end up going, and you get that offense flowing.
Yeah, another thing is too. I mean, they had how many layups did they? I mean, it was what 10 of
Oh
23.
man,
I know. You know the
yeah,
definite. Sometimes stat broadcast, live stats can be a little bit either too liberal or too conservative with the layup numbers. But I mean, 10 of 23 is what it said, and we got to take stat broadcast for what it says because it's all we have. Unless you want to go through the whole game and count how many layups they actually missed, which takes a lot of time.
yeah,
Wall had one in the second half where he was wide open. Maybe he was surprised that he was that open because he hasn't gotten many of those looks lately with the way he's been defended. But they got to be able to finish. I think that's they're too often they leave points on the board, the free throw line, second chances the other night, and missing layups. They got to be able to convert those, and it's been a problem more so lately than it has been all season. It's been an issue pretty much all season, but more so magnified in these close games and losses that they've had. You look back on the stats and, there's other things that factor into a win or loss, but you can usually look at a couple of different, statistical categories. Well, if they make a couple more of these layups or free throws or such, so on and so forth, the game's different. I mean, you go back and look through, you probably could have said that game the other night against Michigan. They should have been able to, and we've hit on this already, but they liked most of the looks they were getting late in that game as they were missing. They missed 15 of the last 17 shots. They were getting good looks. They just didn't finish.
right.
They weren't going in. They were missing. So, you just want to see that them finish more of those shots, especially when they're closer to the basket, because with the margin for error so slim for them, when you start making errors like that, becomes harder to win.
No, definitely, definitely, and it's going to be interesting to see how Wisconsin plays this matchup. Our guy Raul says, "I smell a big Chucky game." It's going to be an interesting matchup because you've got two pretty solid defensive guards in him against Caleb McConnell. McConnell obviously averaging I think it's 2.5 steals per game. Not the best offensive guard, but solid defensive guard. How do you envision that matchup kind of coming along? Do you think that the Badgers are going to look to target that matchup, or what do you think goes on offensively in regards to Chucky Hepburn?
Well, I mean, like I said a couple minutes ago, I mean, they just I don't have the numbers in front of me, but he was 1 for 9, 0 for 3 the other night. He said yesterday when we talked to him that sometimes he settles or maybe forces the issue. There's been a couple of instances where he's been kind of off balance and falling over as he was, taking some layups. And those are the couple of things that he hit on yesterday as we talked to him about the performance he had, against Michigan, and then going back to Nebraska and, some of the shots late that he's missed. I think just him, getting the right shots and taking the right shots and not feeling like he's got to, and this is going to be, like you said, tough matchup, tough defensive guard in McConnell, who's a very good player. And we've seen him a couple times, twice last year. And then obviously he's a little older player in this league. So, but this will be the third time Chucky goes against him. So, I just think that, he's got to be in control tomorrow. I mean, you can't, force things against a guy like that. Can't get out of your game against a guy like that, because that's when mistakes, turnovers, and poor shots can happen. So just got to find a way to get into rhythm and to kind of. And I think the big thing with him, after the last couple of games he's had and some of the shots he's missed, he's got to get going early. See a couple go in, get some confidence going. Because I think a couple times throughout this season, like I look back to that Illinois game when they lost at home. He had been struggling coming into that game, and he didn't play well in the first half offensively, but in the second half when they went on a big run to take the lead, and obviously they lost the game by 10, but they took the lead, and Chucky was playing in a rhythm. He saw a couple shots going early in the half, and he was attacking, and he was very meticulous about it. I think that's he's a sophomore. He's still young, but he's also considered a veteran now because he's played so much. So he's got to know when to attack and when to get off to other guys. I think now that Esijan has started to really stack some consistent performances, that maybe has taken some pressure off of Chucky. And obviously more needs to happen as well with the bigs. Can they get going? Can they start to give you some consistency? I think that would be big for Chucky as well, because a lot of times too, if you think about it, like if he's the one making their best shot maker and everybody else is not making them, teams can just key in on him. I mean, sometimes they're one dimensional in that way where he kind of is. If he's the one guy that's going, it's easy to take one guy away.
No, I agree. And I mean, in a way, like Guard said, not only about the late game decision making, but in general, it's not all about Hepburn himself. The shot selection and Hepburn's performances, it's also about how is the rest of the team playing, because when you have that added pressure, it does take its toll. And I mean, Chucky Hepburn, like you said, he's a guy who, once he gets in a rhythm, is pretty strong. And I think it is important to get him some open looks early on, be it from 3-point range off screens or be it from him attacking the rim. But I think he also has to understand to be more aggressive. It seemed like he was reliant on his jumper against Michigan a lot, looking for that fadeaway shot. And I think that's something where he's got to tone it in, understand it's a part of his arsenal, but also look back and see how do I get better shots? How do I attack the rim so that the shots that I want to take, such as the step back, becomes more open and it becomes a more accessible shot? And so to me, that's kind of where I'm looking at for Chucky Hepburn. How do you improve that? And from there, if he can really get in a rhythm by taking the good shots early and also remaining aggressive, I think it opens up the entirety of his game and really the floor for the Wisconsin offense.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. I don't have anything to counter with there.
People talking about my background. Y'all, this is the Wisconsin locker room background. I saved the 49ers one for 49ers shows. Come on, man. But no, moving forward, though, we've got to talk about the bread and butter of what today's show is about. And it's really the excitement that we've seen brewing over the last few months, spring ball. I mean, we've seen the videos from Brady Collins, our strength and conditioning coach. We've seen the different promos that Wisconsin's kind of put out. What's kind of your expectation heading into spring ball about how this program is going to be, understanding that it's really a new change in culture and a new change in coaching staff all around?
Well, it's going to be compared to last year, and I know there was a new offensive coordinator last year, but it's going to be really so many storylines to get into during spring ball. Just so many new people to talk to, from assistants to players. That makes it a lot more interesting on our end, I guess. Obviously, the practices themselves will be really interesting because you're watching new offensive and defensive. We'll see how the defense looks. They haven't really revealed much in terms of whether or not they're going to run what they ran at Cincinnati or what they were doing here at Wisconsin. Seems like it's going to maybe be trying to find the blend, how to mesh those two together. That will be kind of interesting to watch. But obviously, the offense with the new air raid attack, you got new receivers, you got new quarterbacks, you got like I said, new across the board, which makes it so much more interesting for us and the fans to consume content that's being put out there, about this new era for the program. So I'm really looking forward to getting to some practices at the end of March, and obviously getting to talk to the assistants over the next couple of weeks. We talked to Mike Brown and the receivers coach, and then Colin Hitchler, the safeties and co-defensive coordinator this week. And we'll get another set of assistants coming up here, and that will kind of lead us into spring ball. But yeah, it's going to be exciting for sure.
No, I agree. And I mean, when you talk about the defense, it will be intriguing to see how does Wisconsin utilize the personnel that they have, because a lot of the defense, we saw the overhaul, but a lot of overhaul came at quarterback, receiver, some of the prime positions offensively. When you look at the defensive personnel, apart from defensive line, where they added two defensive ends and Jeff Petrowski and Darian Varner, it's very similar group. The linebacker group's fairly similar. The cornerback group has a ton of freshman talent. But apart from Jason Maitre, it's pretty similar all around. And so I will be intrigued. I do think the personnel might fit what Cincinnati ran with the 3-3-5, specifically because the linebackers that Wisconsin has good against the run, and it might be more of a 3-2-6 because of the safety group. It seems like Colin Hitchler said how he was excited about some of the safeties, talked about a couple of them. Hunter Roller, obviously a guy who we've seen been a thumper, and he's a guy who's got the ability to hit hard. We've seen him play. We saw the 3 safety sets last year. That was a new element that Jim Leonhard kind of incorporated with Roller, with Latu, and with John Torchio when the 3 of them were healthy. This year, I could envision Hunter Roller being a part of the rotation. Travion Blacklock, we've heard from Colin Hitchler earlier this week, how he played a ton of ball coming back from the injury, but he seems like he's going to be an integral piece. The speed is there, the traits are back there, and I think that's going to be an integral part. And then so you talk about them too, but you also talk about a guy like Kamoy Latu, who had a solid first year here at Wisconsin, but also room to grow, especially with his run defense in terms of taking angles. But you've got a good safety group, you've got a good you've got an emerging kind of cornerback group where some roles are going to be have to figure out, especially who plays the boundary opposite of Alexander Smith and who ends up being the nickel. Is it the veteran in Maitre? Is it going to be one of those younger guys like Lofi, Amon Williams, maybe even Avion Jones? Who ends up figuring out at the cornerback roles? I think that's the biggest question, really, defensively. But intrigued to see the scheme and how they utilize their players.
Yeah, sorry, I was kicked off. I was kind of my computer had a little malfunction again for the second time. So
We good.
Apologize for that, but yeah, I mean that's one of the biggest storylines for going into spring ball. It depends on who you talk to. Obviously, the offense is new and exciting. It's a huge departure from what Wisconsin was, in the past. Going all the way back up to Barry Alvarez. So that's huge. But the defense is also arguably just as big with the new staff and how they want to mix or blend in what they did at Cincinnati and what Wisconsin had been doing here under Jim Leonhard. That's going to be fascinating to watch. And I think obviously a big talking point has been the outside linebackers as well.
Yeah.
They really like what they have there, and that's part of the reason why they're not going to go to a full maybe 3-3-3-5 because Wisconsin has recruited that position so well. Nick Herbig last year was had a first team All Big Ten season. Now they have a couple of other guys kind of coming up and competing for those roles. You have CJ Getz, who had a quietly put together a pretty good 2022 season. He's coming back. You got Daryl Peterson and TJ Bowlers and Caden Johnson and just a lot of young guys at that position. Well, Caden Johnson might not classify as young. He's been here for a couple of years. Same with Bowlers and Peterson, but they haven't played as much because they were all behind Herbig and Noah Burks, obviously, before that. But that's going to be interesting to see who kind of steps up in those positions and how they utilize those guys. I think that's going to be really something that I'm looking forward to seeing. And obviously, you mentioned the back end of the defense. You got, you did lose Torchio, but you get Wohler and Latu coming back, and they're really excited about Austin Brown. when Leonard was still here, obviously he would really rave about Brown's athleticism and what he can give them, his versatility as well. And then you got you got some corners coming back. Alexander Smith, really steady for them when he was healthy, when he has been healthy. Last year during spring ball, the coaches were talking of him as their guy, number one guy. He obviously missed some time with the injury that, seemed to really nag him longer than maybe they thought. And he provided, he showed what he can do when he was out there and healthy this year. And then, you got another position with some younger guys who are probably going to be asked to take on larger roles. Ricardo Hallman, a guy I'm really interested to watch in the spring.
I agree.
For whatever reason, maybe others don't see it the same, but he played well for them when he was in there last year, aside from that one game against Michigan
State, right? Yeah.
He had a tough matchup against a really good receiver in Jaden Reed. And had a tough day, had a really tough day filled with a lot of tough lessons, and I think I'm interested to see how he bounces back from that. How can he take another step and maybe use what he learned that day to continue to grow as a player? Because he didn't play much after that game. Smith was healthy pretty much the rest of the year, and that performance probably hurt Hallman's confidence so much, and it was compounded by the fact that he didn't see the field much after that. He played a little bit in the bowl game, maybe got one or two snaps here and there. I actually think it was the next week against Purdue. He came in after somebody had gotten hurt, and the first play, Purdue's quarterback Aiden O'Connell went after him, and Hallman got called for pass interference. And then after that, he was done. He didn't really see the field at all. So I'm interested to see how he's kind of approaching the season after what he went through down the stretch. I think he has, he's a little bit small on the smaller side. But he did. I thought I was impressed with him early on, and up until that Michigan State game, really, I thought he was kind of getting him through until Smith was able to be fully healthy. And then obviously you got other guys at that group too, Shaw and Dort and Clark, three of the transfers they brought in last year, they're gone. So you got a lot of snaps there to replace. Obviously Clark had his issues with injuries, so maybe not him, but Dort and Shaw played a lot of football for them last year. So it's going to be interesting to see what other guys, in addition to Hallman, are kind of maybe some of the freshmen they signed, if they can make an impact either early in spring ball or in fall camp. Can they do enough to kind of see the field early? And then the inside linebackers, I think that's really, I feel like they have that solidified with Turner and Muma. But, I am interested to see if Jake Chaney, can he push? I mean, he played well last year when he had chances. And I wouldn't write him off as somebody who is going to be in the mix this year. And Brian Sanborn too, back last year. And obviously it's important to note that every staff sees things differently. So
correct.
Maybe, this coaching staff, obviously they see it completely differently than the last one did. It's just how it is. And, it's important to maybe not lock guys into positions yet, because these new guys see things differently. But Brian Sanborn is a guy the last staff was pretty excited about last summer and during training camp, when he was kind of in the mix for a couple weeks in that competition. There was 4 or 5 guys battling for those 2 spots, or 4 spots in the 2 deep, obviously. That was a fascinating position battle to watch. Can those 2 guys, maybe push? I'm not saying there's going to be a competition inside linebacker, but those 2 guys are probably good enough to see the field this year. And I'll be interested to see, what strides they've made in the spring. And obviously the defensive line is you got to find somebody
to replace the guys, right? Herbig and Benton.
You got Benton. That'll be interesting to see what they do there. Gio Paez obviously is probably obviously the most experienced option they have, but I thought Kurt Neal started to catch on a little bit at the end of last year, and I'll be interested to see if he can emerge at that spot. So there's a lot of storylines in defense. Like I said, the offense is going to be fun. It's going to be fun to watch. It's going to be fun to see what they're doing. It's going to be fun to watch a spring practice and not see so many, just the same running play all over again. You're going to see passing. This is an air raid offense. They're still going to run the ball, but The offense, it'll be exciting to watch, but I just think there's a lot of underrated storylines on defense that might not be getting as much attention, from the scheme, how they're organizing that, and just the position battles and guys, a lot of younger guys kind of vying for some roles. That's going to be really interesting to watch.
And you talk about a lot of great stuff there. I mean, like you said, the defense probably does deserve some love because there's a lot of different topics, especially because the bread and butter of this new coaching staff, in terms of who came from Cincinnati, is all on the defensive side. And when you talk about some of the position groups, defensive line, one of the intriguing parts that really I'm interested to see what the coaching staff does with is, do they maybe switch to more of a 4-2-6 or a 4-3 kind of formation a little bit to adjust, because when you bring in guys like Darian Varner, a guy who's around 275, 280 pounds, and then Jeff Petrowski, a bit of a smaller defensive end, maybe around 260, 265, they're guys who have the ability to rush the passer, but more so at the edge position, but potentially have the versatility to kick back in. And that's what that 4-3 alignment potentially helps you with, is you can have versatile guys where maybe a James Thompson kicks back in and plays at the 3 tech instead of playing at the 5 tech and things like that. And so I'm intrigued to see what the Badgers do with their alignments and who exactly is able to differentiate themselves, because they've got a lot of good names. We talked about a couple of them, and then the outside linebacker room, even TJ Ballers, Caden Johnson, and Daryl Peterson, guys that also at least the latter two saw the field in the towards the end of the season a good amount, and now have some big minutes to replace with no Nick Herbig. CJ Getz, a veteran, is gone too, and I believe I mean, obviously Keanu Benton's gone, so that room will be very intriguing. The linebacker room, you're right. It does seem a little more set than the other rooms just because of the uncertainty in some of the other rooms, but it's still a room to watch, especially if the Badgers utilize 3 linebackers, because who are they going to trust to be the third guy? And also, Cincinnati loved these packages where they were guys. Ooh, my bad. Getz is back. Getz is back. So we got one guy who did start last year, but at the linebacker room, if they utilize 3 linebackers, I'm interested to see who exactly cracks the rotation. And remember, Cincinnati in that defense, they love to blitz linebackers, so they might value that athleticism over other aspects, because it allows them to be more versatile with their defense and create unfavorable looks for opposing offensive linemen, where they might look to blitz a linebacker, drop him back into coverage, and then blitz off the edge, or look to blitz off the edge, but then send a linebacker over and force these different shifts in the offensive line that help you generate pressure. But in the back end is very intriguing, because it seems like that's where you have the most open spots. Hunter Roller was a guy who got injured last year at a point, but no Torch. He's gone. 3 big names are gone at the cornerback position. Alex Smith seems to have solidified a spot. I think he's one of the locks on the defensive side because he's one of the better ones. Rico Hallman's an interesting case because he was a starter last year, but then he got benched. And really, my thing with Rico Hallman is, how does he address that mentality of his and the confidence? Because he's a small guy, he understands it, but you have to be able to win at the catch point, even if you're a small guy. And if Rico Hallman can show that, if he doesn't get beat over the top, which is the big thing if you play defenses like cover 3 where they want you to press and things like that. If he doesn't get beat over the top, that's where Rico Holman, I think, is going to be valuable, because if he can keep the mentality, shake off some poor plays, and doesn't get beat over the top, then you have a solid player. It's just the issue was it felt as if he got beat over the top a couple of times. That was the biggest mistake he made during games last year. And so Holman's a guy, again, who was a freshman last year, has time to grow still as a redshirt now sophomore. And there's a lot of different names, including a lot of young guys in that cornerback room and the safety room, to where it's intriguing to see which of the young guys can make a name for themselves and get some early playing time, while which of the veterans who might not have had playing time before, which of them can step up and see the field as well.
Yeah, but just we got a question here. Which new corner makes the
I'll let you
biggest?
take this. Which new corner makes the biggest impact? So I guess he's talking about both the freshman and also the veteran in Maitre. Who do you think it is? Because the Badgers had a lot of nice defensive backs come in the class. I mean, you talk about
Yeah,
Braden Moore and all the young guys, but also
since
Maitre.
since I need to see, the practices and how those play out, it's always tough to forecast uh, with the younger guys what how quickly they're going to be able to catch on. Not so much physically, but mentally. The playbook much more complex, obviously at the college level than in high school. Let's just be honest. I wouldn't be surprised to see one of those two younger guys. Some of the younger corners make a big impact. But I think Maitri was a really good pickup for them in the portal. They needed some experience there, so I'm going to go with him. It might seem like the easy answer, but I think that just his experience, and if you read a little bit about his background, he can play a lot of different spots in the secondary. And talking to Colin Hitchler the other day, obviously not the corners coach, but you could tell that this staff is similar to the last staff in that they value versatility in the secondary. Alexander Smith, for example, can play safety if needed. He did it last spring, and when they had so many injuries at that position, he was playing corner, nickel, and safety. He was rotating between three spots. I think I can see Matry playing kind of the same role for them. He can play safety if needed. He can play in the slot. He can go on the outside. He's a really physical guy. He's not afraid to come up and stop the run. He might be one of the more underrated additions. The receivers got so much attention in the transfer portal, and obviously the quarterbacks. But I think he and Darian Varner both on the defensive side of the ball were key pickups for them. You add experience, you know what you're getting. These guys can come in right away and start for you, or be a guy, kind of a platoon guy, come in when needed to take up some snaps. Varner in particular, he'll probably be a starter. The numbers he put up at Temple last year, impressive player. I think he'll make a big impact. But Matry for sure. I think of the new cornerbacks is what I would that would be the answer I give, just because of just his versatility and his experience, and obviously, I think the staff obviously has some familiarity with him, so I think that's what I'm at least expecting for now. But hey, when we watch a couple spring practices or
Yeah.
a couple camp practices, that opinion could change.
No, definitely. I think that's a great way to put it. And when you talk about it, he seems like the easier answer, but it seems like the more clear cut guy. He looks, at least projects to be a guy to play in the slot. But I wouldn't be surprised if he is one of those versatile pieces that they like to move as well. Experience is certainly there, playing at Boston College a lot, but I do expect him to probably make the biggest impact. But I'll go with the dark horse, and it's a guy who isn't even on campus, but a guy who reminisces a lot of fans and a lot of thoughts about a guy who the Cincinnati staff utilized very well when they were at Cincinnati, and that's Sauce Gardner, a 6'3" corner, around 190, and they have another 6'3" corner that they got, Amari Snowden, who initially committed to Cincinnati. Now, as for who makes the biggest impact in year one, I think it'll be tough to say Snowden will, because I think the coaching staff will want him to bulk a little more in terms of getting some more size, but the length is there. And if you want to run that cover three system, the press man that they like to run with Sauce Gardner back then, Alexander Smith's capable of doing that. And Amari Snowden, he'll be a guy probably capable of doing that as well because of the length that he provides. You're going to have to worry about the hands probably at the next level to begin with, but if you go through the mistakes, that'll be possible for sure.
Yeah, definitely. You can tell, well, just the mold of what the last, this new coaching staff likes in terms of corners. You can tell they want a little bit more size, length, and physicality maybe than what they've had here in the past. So it'll be really interesting to see Snowden live in action here. Really looking forward to seeing him for sure.
No, definitely. I want to ask you this. Of the guys on that defensive line that are still with the Badgers, we talk about James Thompson, Isaiah Mullins, I believe, is returning, CJ Getz is returning. Of the kind of key pieces last year, who do you think remains kind of on top, and who do you think maybe gets a little bit more of a diminished role with additions like Varner and Petrowski coming in?
It's a tough question because I think both Rodas Johnson and James Thompson Jr. took some steps forward last
Right.
year. I thought that, especially down the stretch of the season, both of those guys at Iowa game, I think both were making tackles for a loss of yards. James Thompson obviously got a lot of starting experience with Mullins hurt. I can't see Mullins' role being diminished, and I'll be curious because he's a bigger guy. I'll be curious if they move him inside at all. I think that's something
Yeah.
that maybe we can look at. But that's a tough question because you got Varner, obviously, who you're expecting to make a pretty big impact. I guess I don't know. That's a tough one. I guess if I had to make a guess of whose role diminishes, I would probably have to go with one of those defensive ends. Just with it's a crowded room now with Varner and Petrowski. Obviously, can play that position. He's listed as an edge rusher on
Mhm.
24/7 Sports' database. So to me, and he can obviously play outside linebacker and defensive end. So that's going to be interesting to see where he kind of fits in. But I don't know. With Varner, you probably can assume that he'll be a starter. So I would probably have to go with one of those defensive ends. Probably going to be one of the more underrated maybe battles in camp to see who can kind of come out of that. On the other side, if you have Varner on one end, Rodas and James probably going to be duking it out for the other. So it's going to be interesting to see those two guys. James Thompson really intriguing. He's athletic. He moves pretty well for a guy his
Right.
size. So he really impressed me last year, but so did Rodas Johnson, and I think he is starting to find maybe more of a role as a leader as well. He was pretty vocal. This past year, he's a really energetic guy. When they did press conferences or player availability before the bowl game, he was one of the 4 or 5 players that we got, and that tells me that they're sending out. They're only doing the team leaders and captains. He was one of them. That means that he's obviously very highly thought of in the locker room. So that'll be interesting to see that kind of unfold. But yeah, it should be interesting. The defensive line is going to be something to watch for sure.
No, I agree, and I think that it's going to be a very intriguing battle, and also intriguing to see who plays where. And because if Cincinnati, sorry, if Wisconsin, the old Cincinnati staff coming to Wisconsin want to run that 3-3-5, there are obviously limited spots. If they want to run a 4-3 or a 4-2-6, it depends because do you want more agile guys kind of there, or do you want more of the space eaters that kind of just take up space and allow you to play with lighter boxes to defend the run? And so there are a lot of questions to be asked schematically that kind of go into who necessarily gets more playing time. I would be intrigued to see Mullins and James Thompson Jr. potentially get snaps on the inside, not necessarily maybe at the nose, but maybe at the 3 tech, because Thompson, he's a big guy. He's 6'7", and he's got the size. If he can maybe add a little more pure strength, that helps him a little bit in that situation. I mean, Mullins has obviously been there, and he's been a guy who has played for a good amount of time now as a sixth-year senior coming into this year. And so I do think that there's a lot of different elements that you could talk about. Rodas Johnson, I would assume he likely sticks to the 5 tech kind of position, maybe more out wide. Maybe even if they go with a wider base, maybe somewhere between the 5 and the 7, or 5 and the 9, depends on how they run that system. But I do think that that's kind of how I envision it. It will be intriguing though to see who snaps necessarily get cut, because the part about this Fickle experiment that we've seen so far, man, they got a hell of a lot of players now that can play. That's the thing. They've got a lot of players that can play, and a lot of players with experience too.
Yeah, it's the same kind of story offensively too. You're going to have a lot of receivers. You got a lot of receivers battling for time. Obviously, you're pretty set at quarterback with Mordecai, but they're going to have a battle for that kind of backup spot between Evers and Braden Locke. So that'll be interesting. There's just as many kind of questions of who's going to be where and who kind of ends up where on offense in terms of
Yeah.
who's too deep. It'll be interesting to see on both sides of the ball. Really,
Mhm.
so many different angles to take. It's going to be exciting to get there and watch some practices for sure.
No, definitely. Mike, we'll talk about the offense on the next one, but to end today's show, our guy Raul has a question. Record prediction. Way too
I'm not
early.
getting into
This is
that
a
this
bunch of
early.
BS. Do you think they win at least 10 games? I'll keep it open ended. Not necessarily a record prediction.
I'm going to set I'm going to set it at
Or
like
give me an
9.
over-under. Where would you
I'm
set
not
it?
over or under.
Like, where would you, if you were an odds maker, where would you set the bar for this team at the over-under?
I'm gonna place. I'm not gonna do any of this gambling stuff or anything. I'm just gonna say that maybe my expectation for now would be 9 or 10 wins. That's what I'm thinking. I'm
There we
not
go.
gonna go any lower or higher than that. I think that's fair place to start. Knowing, I haven't watched the practice yet, so I'm not gonna, uh, make any rash predictions based on just the offseason alone.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually in agreement with you. I think earlier in the offseason when we were first getting the look into who was exactly coming, I said 9-3. I know it might be on the lower end for some people, but I do think I said 9-3 at the moment. We'll see, because really the only thing that we can know is what's the scheme, what's the talent, and that all comes in spring ball to help determine how many games this team's going to win. But a lot of factors and a lot of different talk, which is going to happen for the entirety of this offseason, given the hype around this team at the moment. But Mike, I do really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining me for this hour. Let
Appreciate
us
it.
know where we can find you both on Twitter. You can find on Twitter, I believe, at M Hogan Reports, but also at Badger247. He does a lot of good work there. So be sure to check out Mike's work. As for mine, be sure to remain up to date here at Bucky's Fifth Quarter. We're going to be putting out a lot of content, both on the football end, but also on the basketball end. So stay tuned. We're going to figure it out. For those of you guys that are watching, thank you guys so much for tuning in. And